Hey people. So I've been watching Munich tonight. It's the early hours of the morning now. Well, actually, it's approaching 8 a.m. I've pulled another all-nighter. I watched the film Munich, Steven Spielberg, 2005. Seen it a few times. Very powerful political thriller. If you haven't seen it, starring Eric Bana, Daniel Craig, and others. It's basically about the aftermath of the 1972 Munich massacre and the Israeli Mossad group that tracked down the assassins across Europe and the Near East, tracked down the attackers of Munich, I should say. Powerful political thriller. I just felt it was topical with everything that's been going on. So I want to say a few things about the latest developments and my thoughts right now about this. Um, no one video, no film, no book, no documentary can really bring in everything that involves the complexities of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Um, and I think this is something where if you come out strongly on one side or the other, inevitably at some point you're going to have to defend bloodshed. Because if you support the Free Palestine argument, um, then inevitably you support um, rocket attacks on Israel. If you support Israel, inevitably you support Israel's right to defend itself, which includes military force. So, Gal Gadot, the famous actress, said that you can't be neutral on this. Um, and I think that that's a widespread feeling. Um, it's such a polarizing conflict. I mean, it's often struck me that there's a lot of wars going on in the world, and some of them, incidentally, a lot bloodier than this. In fact, if you look at wars, say in the 2020s, Sudan this year, over 10,000 people have died. Ukraine, of course, although Ukraine has been extensively covered. Um, Ethiopia, there's various internal conflicts going on there, or wars. Um, the ongoing war in the Sahel, which includes various countries, the Mexico drug war, Yemen, the war in Syria is far from over, although it sometimes seems to have faded into the background. Burma, the internal conflict there, and there's others that I haven't even named. In fact, when you actually compile all the conflicts, and this may surprise some people, but I have done research on this. If you compile all the conflicts between Israel and the Palestinians over the past few decades, it amounts to around 20,000 deaths on both sides, which is a lot of people. But when you consider other conflicts that have been even bloodier over a short period of time, it gets to the question, why does this particular conflict ignite such strong views? There are other ongoing conflicts in the world where there's long-standing tensions: India and Pakistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Russia and Ukraine, and there's other examples. But there is something that seems absolutely endless about the war between Israel and the Arabs, or more specifically, Israel and the Palestinians. Palestinians itself is a contentious term because there has never been a state of Palestine ever. There was a historic region. In fact, in the late 19th century, the term was adopted by British and French historians as kind of a collective term of convenience for what became the British Mandate of Palestine. But there's never been a Palestinian state, and that's important. Anyway, I don't want to get into the history of this because it's just so complex and there's so many layers to it. I do think, though, my instinct is um, the Jews have a much older claim to the land than anyone. I mean, except for cavemen and except for Neolithic peoples in that region, the Fertile Crescent. But the fact of the matter is, the United Kingdom of Israel, the ancient Kingdom of Israel, long predated anything. Well, predated Islam by millennia. That's just a reality. But I think if you get into arguments over who the land belongs to, my goodness, that'll go on forever. So just focusing on this latest violence. The thing that obviously stands out is the proportion of casualties, because in most of these flare-ups, it's predominantly Palestinian casualties. On this occasion, it's predominantly Israeli. And as is always the case, it reverberates around the world. There's been angry clashes in London, in Florida, New York City, no doubt other European cities. And, you know, it reverberates around the world. And the flare ups are, I mean, the tensions between the two sides is obviously the pro Palestinian protesters and the pro Israeli protesters. Jews in London have said they feel unsafe. Now, I have not heard the same claim from the Palestinian side or the pro Palestinian people. I haven't heard them say they feel unsafe from Jews in Britain. There is something fundamentally significant about that. And I have to be absolutely honest. When I see people waving Israeli flags in Britain, I don't feel threatened. When I see people waving Palestinian flags, you know, it would be unfair to say they're all pro Hamas, but I think inevitably, when you consider that Hamas controls the Gaza Strip, and they have done since 2007, you know, they can say that they want peace, but if they cannot condemn Hamas's rocket attacks, if they cannot condemn Hamas's attacks on Israel, um, then that's hot air. Now, some would say, well, the Israeli side don't condemn violence either, but how can Israel, how can Israel be expected to have a peaceful future when its very existence is under threat? Its very existence. There is one thing though. I'm a staunch supporter of Israel's right to defend itself staunchly, and Rishi Sunak has come out. You know, he hasn't equivocated. He said there's no two sides. Hamas is a terrorist group. Starmer has said similar things. Corbyn, you know, I want to vomit when I see what he's come out with, but I'm not surprised. And I just thank God that man never got near number 10. Corbyn wasn't even neutral. You know, he refused to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack on young people enjoying a music concert. Now, that says something about Corbyn's morals. The fact that this man cannot bring himself to condemn that, but make generic calls for peace. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Um, you know, right now, what they're doing is holding these hostages, including children, including Holocaust survivors. And I think they're banking on, well, if Israel commits more airstrikes, it will inevitably kill their own people. But how can Israel not be expected to respond? I will say one thing though, and I am saying this as a staunch supporter of Israel's right to defend itself. One thing that does make me uneasy, there is absolutely no question that Gaza is a dismal, dismal place. And the fact is that Israel has had a blockade of Gaza for years. They've also cut off all supplies. Now, I'm a supporter of Israel, but I think it would be very, very bad PR in the eyes of the world if they don't allow some sort of humanitarian corridor or some sort of access to medicine or something. If they're just bombarding Gaza to smithereens, you know, the world's going to sort of forget that terrorist atrocity on the young people in the desert, and they'll start thinking, well, this is what Israel's doing. It's utterly inhumane. Um, and you know, it's all very well saying, you know, leave your homes, but they literally have nowhere to go to. I think Israel is the far more advanced party in this. I think Israel does have a moral responsibility to provide some sort of humanitarian corridor or something. I mean, they would say we're dealing with terrorists, but I would say, well, this is surely the point. Are you going to reduce yourself to the ethics of terrorists? Are you going to use the same tactics? I do think there's a different set of values. I mean, I just don't think you would get a situation where even the IDF, and you know, they have not always been clean. I don't think they would have a situation where they would execute Palestinian women on video and celebrate it. I just think there is a cult of death in the Islamist mindset that prevails in the territories. It's a cult of death. I've said this before that I think Hamas would gladly sacrifice 1,000 Gazans if it meant killing one Israeli. I think that they don't give a damn about Palestinians. Unfortunately, it is ordinary Palestinians who pay a very heavy price. And if your family been killed by an Israeli airstrike, you're not going to love Israel. That's just a no-brainer. There's very, very, very raw human emotions at play here because both sides are suffering immensely. Um, and there's going to be blind hatred. And the whole thing is a tragedy. But this latest conflict has unquestionably been brought about solely by Hamas. It was their decision to paraglide into that concert, to slaughter young people, to drag a young woman from her boyfriend. There's been reports that women have been raped. It's very, very plausible. What they done to that young German Israeli woman was repulsive. They dragged her into Gaza, the back of a jeep, naked. The mob spat at her. Her family had to see that in the circulated footage. I mean, I cannot fathom the mental horror that they will be going through. Um, but what else can be said? I mean, this is not going to end. Israel is going to go for a full ground invasion. I think. I hope that they wipe out Hamas. I hope they wipe out Hamas for the sake of everyone, because actually that is in the best Palestinian interest long term. Now, Hamas has no democracy about it, and I think so long as Hamas exists, there will never be peace in the Holy Land, because they're a cult of death and they exist for the destruction of Israel, not for freeing Palestine. Because A, there is no Palestine, and B, they're actually a much bigger enemy to the Palestinian people than the Israelis because they want perpetual war. They want perpetual war. They know the power of Israel, yet they still keep poking the what analogy can I use? They keep poking David, you know. I don't know what else to say really, but I won't say I'm 100% on the side of Israel in everything. That would be wrong. And I wouldn't call myself a zealous pro-Israel advocate. There are some things that Israel does that doesn't sit well with me. I am not comfortable with the blockade. I'm not comfortable with cutting off all power supplies. And actually, from a military perspective, I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. Surely that will make it harder for the IDF to find the hostages. I don't really see the purpose of that. Um, and I think that they need to soon provide some sort of humanitarian corridor because, in the eyes of the world, Israel, at least the eyes of the West, Israel is supposed to be the advanced side. So they have the means to do that. But make no mistake about it, there is a war on Israel. And like any sovereign country, it has a right to defend itself. I would say what sickens me is that across the Islamic world, there's this mantra of free Palestine. But I would say to Pakistanis, what if you had a war with India? You know, would you be talking about, what about Kashmir? What about, anyone in the world who is pro-Palestine? I would say, if your country was attacked, if your country had rocket barrages, what would you expect your government to do? To sit back and do nothing? If there was a terrorist atrocity on your soil, would you expect your government not to act? I think Israel is unique, except perhaps for Ukraine. Except in the case of Ukraine, it's only one country, Russia, which wants to eradicate its very existence. But in the case of Israel, it's most of its neighbors. I think Iran is the viper in the region, or I should say the Iranian regime. A lot of ordinary Iranians are fed up with, being tied to the Palestinian cause because they've got enough problems of their own. They I honestly think a lot of Iranian citizens don't necessarily hate Israel because they see how barbarous their own regime is to them. Hundreds killed last year. Incidentally, the Nobel Peace Prize is won to a young woman whose name eludes me now. I should have that on hand, but it's went to a young woman who has stood up to the regime for women's rights in Iran, a very well-deserved Nobel Peace Laureate. Um, but anyway, that's my thoughts tonight. I still absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself, but I'm very aware that there's extreme suffering going on in Gaza, and it's perpetual. It's been described as the world's largest open prison, but when a territory is run by an Islamist death cult, then they are going to be the biggest enemy of the people there. I mean, you could say that Israeli airstrikes are killing the Gazans, but in 2014, there were 23 Gazans executed by Hamas. Hamas doesn't want any progress for Gaza. Their only existence is for the destruction of Israel. I mean, all the millions that's been sent to Gaza over the years by Islamic relief charities, you name it, and there has been a lot sent in there. What's happened to it? Um, it's went on building up a war against Israel. Now, obviously, when Israeli warplanes are, blowing the hell out of Gaza, that isn't going to help either. But I see this as a perpetual war because so long as Israel is surrounded by terrorist death cults that want to destroy it, it's going to have no choice but to retaliate. What I would say Israel should do is, there may be hardline Israelis saying this is a battle for survival, to hell with world opinion, but that would be a big mistake because if, world opinion turns against Israel, and I think that would be a tragedy, then that means an end of funding. It means an end of donations. I don't think it's going to happen from America, but that may happen from Europe. Um, but I think they need to provide some sort of humanitarian relief corridor or something. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm a little surprised my last video only got 60 views. I thought this would be one that would go viral actually, but you can never tell. My Lucy Letby video was viral. A couple of others viral by my standards. I consider over 1,000 views to be viral by my standards. Um, but yeah, we'll see what happens with this.